welcome to this week's 2 Men in the Middle. This is where two men in the middle of the country talk about politics, current events, and other stuff. I'm Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Koenig.
Brandon, I got to admit, this was the week that it's like, well, we could either scream at each other or just silently stare in the abyss, and maybe both would be equally telling to what's happening in American politics right now.
We continue to hit new lows, and it does not bode well for our country. And I keep fearing that, again, it's only this type of rhetoric is only going to exacerbate some lunatic or crazy person to take things to the next level.
Yeah.
And there's already been incidents of, gas station clerks, others telling random people to go back to their countries. That's become a refrain.
Somebody attacked a ICE facility. They actually were shot and killed over the weekend, where a protester armed with, I know he had road flares and I think some gas.
I heard about that.
Stuff.
That's happening more and more at ICE facilities throughout the country. Protesters trying to storm them, basically attack, shut them down in whatever way they can. As
I walked in here tonight, that's what I was thinking. When does somebody get hurt? When does this turn violent? You can't have this much high rhetoric happening without something happening. And what would that look like? What scale would it be on? And how would that change the equation, if any? Right.
I mean, the tension is clearly escalating, and we saw last year, with that guy with the sending the mail packages, trying to make improvised bombs.
You even forget
was
about
motivated.
That guy.
I know, and that was a big deal. Thankfully, he wasn't successful, but he was motivated by the rhetoric. He was on Twitter. He all of that was feeding into his mindset. When he went out there and did what he did.
I have a bunch of notes I wrote down this week because I was trying to consume as much news as I could. And my last note is Rand Paul's a dick. We'll save him for last. But
all of a sudden, fiscal responsibility matters. Yeah.
When did that happen? When suddenly did fiscal responsibility in the middle of all of this decide to kind of rear its ugly head through Rand Paul? So, yeah. So let's start with the highlights. And we shot an impeachment. Brought up in the House, got shot down midweek too. I even forgot about that. So for some reason this week, the president decided to get into the middle of the fight of the Democrats between the squad, the 4 junior members of Congress that are all women of color. They were having a fight with Nancy Pelosi. And we talked about that last week.
Right.
That, again, when somebody is lighting themselves on fire as an opponent, you just stand back and let them do it.
Well, and that fight in some ways had bled over to other House members, Democrats, with AOC's chief of staff calling moderate Democrats equivocated.
Basically segregationist and racist.
Right. Comparing them to like 60s Dixiecrats, Southern segregationists. And he also went after Representative Sharice Davids here in the 3rd District personally as well, and said, here's a minority who's, not working on behalf of her people, and basically, for all intents and purposes, calling her a sellout. A completely unprovoked attack, which resulted in the House Democratic Caucus Twitter account going after him.
Yeah.
So you have all of this infighting occurring, and then you have the president who decides to insert himself into the mix and get involved.
First off,
he can't.
With Sharice Davids, wouldn't you have to do something to be considered a sellout? I don't think Sharice Davids has opened her mouth one time since she's been elected to Congress.
She has not, and and she's also been very pragmatic about trying to represent her district, which is why she hasn't signed on to like the Green New Deal or to abolishing ICE. And so he was apparently hitting her for her lack of initiative and adhering to that line, without failing to realize she's an individual. She's wants to keep that seat, and if she does, she should continue doing what she's doing. But it's just an example we talked about how the far left continues to outdo themselves and taking an election for granted that they should win, and continuing to fight among themselves.
So right when we're creating a spectacle of ourselves, we are reinforcing everything Trump and the Republicans want to point to us.
Trump says, hold my beer. You want to see actual racism? Here's racism.
Trump decides, and this is the first thing to unpack, and let's take this from a political perspective. What potential benefit or opening did Trump see by injecting himself into this conversation?
I think that Trump knows that his base needs a boogeyman. They need somebody to go after.
And he needs a boogeyman.
Because, again, he's not going to win re-election. He has forfeited any possibility of touting the economy or touting his achievements, which are very little to none outside of Supreme Court appointments. So he's not going to win based on that. So he has to win based on negativity and attacking the other side and fear mongering, basically saying, you have to re-elect me because if you don't, doomsday will come to our country.
But who is? I agree with your
and
assessment.
He needs
who
a
is
face.
He fear mongering to? Who's left that doesn't know that if you're a Trump supporter, what Trump's about? And who is it that possibly could be persuaded over to his side?
Well, nobody.
By this argument.
See, and I think this is the failure in what he's trying to do is he sees this as a base election, and it's about shoring up the base and keeping the base intact as much as possible. But I think he fails to see that he continues to drive away moderate Republicans at the margins. There were many moderate Republicans last time around that did not vote for Trump but did not vote for Hillary. But he is pushing them in the direction of voting Democrat. And there are many of them on record who have said they have no problem voting for somebody like Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And they are at their tipping point where they think that we have reached a point in this country where, the norms have just been off the rails. And so they would consider voting Democrat this time around. And so I think it's mistaken on his part, but he knows, if he's smart at all, he knows he's not going to gain voters. He's not going to flip people to his side. He's not going to change opinions at this point. So it's keep his base intact and hope that he can, keep the party from disintegrating. But I think it's a mistake. I think he has failed to realize that will only go so far, and that outside of his base, there's enough. If you look at Democrats, independents, and disaffected Republicans, there's more than enough to sway the election the other way.
And Trump is big on energy. One of his big insults is in calling somebody low energy. He prides himself as somebody who's a high energy, high motor guy. And I think he takes the temperature of the base by the amount of energy they reflect back to him. Was this just simply something of, hey, the Democrats were getting energized by debates and by this fight that Pelosi and these four progressives were having? Did he just see this as a way to turn the heat up under his own base and to see if he could inject what he felt was a necessary jolt of energy to people who are already locked in to voting for him? If you're voting for Trump now, you're always going to vote for Trump.
It's not going to change.
Nothing's going to change it. Why come and poke you with this cattle prod at this point?
Well, it's a diversionary tactic in some ways. So it diverts attention from what's going on in the news, and negative attention. But then also he is able to paint the Democrats as radical. He has to have a way to apply this stereotype to the whole party and basically say these four members, the squad, this is the Democratic Party. And if he can have them as the face of the Democratic Party, it makes his job a lot easier going to his base and getting them riled up, amplified, energized to turn out on his behalf.
And if Trump was nibbling around the edges on xenophobic remarks in 2016, he's basically pulled that Band-Aid off and just let everybody know this is going to be the cornerstone of my 2020 campaign.
Yeah.
Who is American? Who is not American? Who belongs here? Who doesn't belong here?
Oh, yeah. And prior to this, he had already made the argument that, if you don't support him, you're not patriotic. And he took that a step further by focusing on minority lawmakers and basically making the claim that they don't belong here.
They don't belong. Go back to your country.
Right. Which again, 3 out of these 4 were born in the United States.
Just happen to be Americans.
And all 4 are American citizens. So, 3 of the 4 have no countries to go back to. They weren't born or lived or raised in other countries. And, the whole idea is just anathema to the melting pot concept and what we think of when we idealize America.
So one of the topics that I have found interesting to try to listen to Republicans explain away Trump's comments, and there seems to be this debate going on right now. What is a racist? What behavior is a racist? And can you ever call somebody a racist? And I think what Republicans are saying, you can never know what's in somebody's heart. You never know when somebody just fumbles over words or express themselves differently. It is against norms to call somebody a racist without some type of overt act. Words aren't enough that would put you in the category of being a racist. What do you think of the whole, how Republicans have done, kind of danced around this whole, they are not going to say he is a racist? Because once you get labeled a racist in politics, isn't the next step you're done?
Yeah, you really can't come back.
You really
that.
Can't.
Well, and it puts supporters of the president and people that vote with him or his agenda or defend him in an awkward spot because they're defending a racist. And so if they have to acknowledge that he's a racist or his conduct is a racist, they are then on the defensive. So I think, psychologically, they have to find some way to cast doubt that he's a racist, and we don't really know what he thinks, even though you have a, history of behavior of statements, that point to that, and we won't go through that laundry list, but there's a lot going back to his days as a developer when he was actually investigated and sued by the Justice Department for not renting to black tenants. So, there's a history there, but part of the problem is that they want to blur the lines, and I think that's dangerous because there is a difference between, somebody's like bigoted uncle who isn't necessarily racist.
That's
they
a
just
common analogy,
right? They use terms that are not, or your, grandma who's 95 and doesn't say things as she should and is on PC, but who doesn't necessarily think that she's racially superior. She just has mistaken stereotypes about people, which is common, throughout the population, that there's bigoted ideas here and there. But it's a very different playing field than someone who's actually racist and conducts himself that way, and believes that there's, inherent differences based on someone's racial makeup, and views everything through the prism of race. That's a completely different
That's
idea.
a good point, in that to be racist, you have to believe in the superiority of one race over another. And also, you mentioned actions versus words. Everybody has somebody in their family or that they've known who we give a pass to on their language and on their words. And if you're excusing Trump, one is you try to do this weird word play when I tell you to go back to your country, or go back to your precinct or the district that you represent, and then come back. I didn't mean it in that traditional kind of race, which is absolute bullshit.
Completely.
That's just you're the hardcorest of Trump supporter who just can't admit anything at that point. But how do you parse out in 2019? Don't words mean as much as actions anymore? Because it used to be, yes, he says things that may be out of bounds or out of step, but in his actions, he's not taking racist actions. Do we draw a distinction between that anymore, or is there a tipping point? If you finally say so much stuff, you garner the label as racist, minus ever maybe doing some type of racist action.
Yeah, and it's hard to say. And I mean, his supporters and defenders will say, oh, look, he signed into law criminal justice reform, and he pardoned, these, individuals, African Americans who were, victims of overzealous prosecution on low-level drug offenses, which he's done, which is true. But again, you don't have to. You can be a racist and still have done good things or shown goodwill, outside of overall holding racist views. It's not always black and white. And so I think his supporters fail to realize that you can still be wrong and still have really wrong, bad ideas about people. And it's hard to know with Trump, because I think with him, it's all about what helps him. So at the end of the day, his views and perceptions and ideas about everybody all comes back to what can get him ahead and what gives him the upper hand. And so, he is inherently going to target members of the opposite party using racist language in ways he wouldn't, the current party. But I think it becomes very difficult to try to parse and say, well, he's not. This is overlooking. I think you have to recognize what it is. And I think we get drawn into this long debate about whether he is or isn't a racist.
Yeah.
Let's not even have that debate. Let's just agree that what he said was racist, it was wrong, and that shouldn't be allowed to stand.
I'm sitting here talking to this microphone trying to find any way not to say the President of the United States is a racist. And every time I come up with something to try to add to the conversation, it sounds silly. Because by any measurable, accepted, measurable definition, it all leads to, you can make a logical argument that the President of the United States is a racist. From the Central Park 5 to the building lawsuit against him, to the words that he says, to the tweets, all of it points to one thing, and that he has a problem with people that are not white.
And remember, he made the
has
statement
a problem with non-white women.
Right. I think it was last year before he made the statement about immigrants that come from blank countries.
Yeah.
That whole thing too. So,
and anytime he talks about people he wants more of in this country, it's always Norwegians or white people.
Oh, he said specifically that he would like more people from like Norway and Sweden. So
I take no pleasure in saying the President of the United States is racist. That is a very damaging thing, I think, to put out there, and it's a damaging thing to have happened to this country. But there's no other way you can approach this even more.
No,
I mean, people are trying to find a path to kind of walk their way through this, and there really is none. And what you just said, if it's so close to the line, it's even reasonable to debate if the president is a racist. Haven't we already lost? I mean, okay, now we're splitting hairs at some point. If we're at that line, aren't we at the bad place already?
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And it's to the point where a lot of his defenders have gone from the standpoint of even arguing about it to deflecting and saying, but he was saying the context because these people are horrible and they have horrible policy, blah, 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 as if somehow that makes it okay or acceptable.
And Ilhan Oman seems to be the one really taking the brunt of this.
Yeah.
And I am no fan of Ilhan Oman. If you look at some of the things that she has done and she has said, she is an anti-Semite.
Oh yeah,
she does not like
she has
Jewish
made those
people.
Right, she has made those statements. She has made statements too regarding 9/11 that are problematic. So there's a whole host to criticize.
Absolutely.
There. But then the irony out of all of this is he makes her into a victim by attacking her this way.
There's anybody that could the only person that could make her look sympathetic is Donald Trump.
Yeah,
without a doubt. And because she has positioned herself in that way, I think this is where Trump's not playing some four-dimensional strategy chess thing, which is the analogy we've used for 3 years. But he knows when you're going to attack and put somebody out front, he very quickly singled out who was going to bear the brunt of this attack and how he could position her to his base as being this enemy, as this foil, this picture of what is the face of somebody who hates America. Here is this person.
Yeah, it's a tried and true playbook. Congressman Duncan Hunter, who ended up being reelected from California, a big supporter of the president.
That's the dude who blamed his wife for stealing the campaign money, right? Okay.
Right. Yeah,
and got away with it.
Threw her under the bus. Yeah, I mean it's still being investigated, but they booked all kinds of travel, everything awful. But his opponent was I want to say Jordanian descent.
Oh yeah.
And it was actually a Christian. He's not Muslim, but he went after his opponent in the election. Basically saying he's a terrorist, he can't be trusted. He's going, all of this. I mean, painting him as a terrorist when he has no terrorist ties at all. I mean, but that is the playbook, and someone who tried to replicate Trump's model completely. So you see what's happening there. You see what's happening now with Trump. He will find the person who he can make a foil as much as possible. And I think Omar is attractive in that way because not only is she a minority, she's Muslim.
Yeah.
He's able to roll out all of this fear-mongering scare tactics with one individual. He can't do that with the other three to the degree he can do with her.
She checks 3 boxes off.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm getting stuck in the good old days syndrome, but when I was younger, I don't remember the United States being this afraid of everything. And maybe this is a post 9/11 consequence of the attack on 9/11. A junior congresswoman who was a socialist would have been laughed at, and never would we have gotten this far. And maybe that's just a function of who we are now, is that we're afraid of so much following that attack. Fear breeds anger. We have to tear down. We can't just rise above anything anymore.
Well, it's such a far cry. If you remember the days after 9/11, I remember President Bush held a summit with interfaith leaders, and he had Muslim leaders there, talking about how we need to differentiate, that the vast majority of Muslims in our country are peaceful. And so he cautioned the American people about going after them. And that seems like a era far removed from where we are today.
Yeah, that the fact that would happen or could happen.
Can you imagine Trump doing something? No, that is not going to.
Absolutely not. So there was a USA Today poll. So everybody is interested in how this impacts 2020.
Yeah.
What are people's reactions to this, especially broken down over key voting blocks that Trump is going to have to win, and if he doesn't, it's going to be very difficult to get back to the presidency. So I wrote a few of these down, and I will admit my bias here. I cherry picked the ones that make the Republicans look the worst.
Yeah.
So we
sure you had plenty of material.
Absolutely, there was a buffet I could choose from, but I want to run a couple of these past you, and just to get kind of your reaction to what do we really feel is going on here. There were a couple of them. Let me start with the big ones. The one I'll throw my main shots. I want to land on the Republicans first. 57% of Republicans agreed with the tweet's message, saying that they should go back to their country. 1/3 strongly agreed with that message. Is there anything we can extrapolate out onto the Republican Party in a wider sense over those types of survey numbers?
Well, it reflects the tendency of the Republican Party base now to become more populist, more driven. It's interesting too, because the number of unaffiliated voters has just continued to skyrocket.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what the breakdown is and how the Republican Party affiliation, self-described affiliation has gone down. That would be interesting to examine. But it tells you that it's become the party of Trump, that basically the Republicans will parrot for the most part what he says, and that's the dynamic you see happening. I don't think you could say that with other recent presidents. You would see more independence from the president, the head of the party, and you don't have that now. So again, it's the realignment we see taking place within the political system.
Let me leave this one on you, because these are the two demographics that we've talked about that Trump has to carry to get to re-election. He can't lose a single vote in the blue wall or Florida or any of the states that he won among women and independents. So 75% of women found these tweets to be offensive, and by a 2-to-1 margin, independents found them to be un-American. So this is where, again, following that,
high numbers,
what were you thinking category? Here are the two populations that the 2018 midterms already reflect we're going to have some problems with. That he does something that I don't know what he could do that they would have found maybe more offensive. That 75% of all women said, yes, I was offended by that. This gets back to the what is the strategy here?
Well, Trump continues to drive them away. And the irony is that independents and women are going to decide this election just as they did the midterms.
They did the last one.
And his continued embrace just of his very narrow base is what is doing him in.
Here's the one that I want to spend some time with, and this one really kind of stuck out to me, and I'm going to try to get this correct. 70% of Republicans said when you are calling someone a racist, it is done in bad faith. So 7 out of 10 Republicans, if I level a charge of racism against you or another Republican, or we'll say anybody, you don't have to be part of the Republican Party, I am doing it out of bad faith, which to me means I have an alternative motive other than bringing to light an outdated, destructive, immoral way of thinking and activity pattern that I would define as racist.
Right. Well, I think that speaks to a general distrust which has been building over time among Republicans, believing that word is used too frequently.
I agree.
And they see it in basically political correct terms, that somebody who just has a different opinion will be labeled racist, and that word is overused and has lost most of its meaning. I think if you talk to a lot of Republicans, they believe that. And so that I think they are extrapolating that out, though, exponentially to apply in all cases.
Trump knew that. And there's no way Trump could articulate what you just articulated about Republicans and race, because that's not what he does. But this
he doesn't know,
strategically tapped into that. It's almost like he knew of my side of the ledger. 7 out of 10 of them have become so, I'm going to use the term jaded, by the media, by culture, by Hollywood, and so conditioned that race, and from their perspective, has been overblown and overused. I can get away with this because they will attribute bad faith to the media and to other entities that report this and comment on it.
Well, and that's one thing many of his supporters seized on it immediately, was the fact that you have all these headlines that, label Trump as racist, or that this was racist language. And they immediately erupted, with, see, that's not a non-biased headline. They're actually, throwing that term out there. They're calling him that. They're not just reporting on what he said. And this validates what we think, that the media is biased.
So there's a large group of people, white people in the United States, who just, what would it take to prove something is racist, or for someone to believe that I acted in a racist way? I don't know what that means anymore. And that poll number, and I think too, maybe that poll number skews everything, because if I believe you're asking me a question in bad faith, I may answer in bad faith as well. That, hey, I do support the president's message, or how accurate can the polling on this be, and can we take the pulse of somebody if 7 out of 10 Republicans asked, if I'm CNN calling you, or the Washington Post calling you to get your reaction to this in a survey, that you feel I'm doing this with a political agenda in mind, and you're not going to feed into that agenda.
I think there's a significant portion that feel that way, and they just immediately distrust. They feel like if they acknowledge that word, that racist is the case with the president, then they're feeding into the mindset that word will continue to be used frequently and overused, and so they're kind of establishing a boundary, like, we're not going to go there right now. And so I saw some people on Facebook who were comparing it to the do you beat your wife frequently type of question, which is, where, there's no right answer to that, because either way there's going to be a consequence that you're going to feed into. And so I think some on the right see it that way. I think that, whether or not they want to acknowledge racism, I think some know it exists, but they don't want to acknowledge it in this case, because they don't like the direction with how the word has been used many other times, and they feel like if they validate it in this case, even if it's a case of where it actually occurred, then they're feeding into the propagation of it as something that can be used over and over.
And what's the next step? Once you admit or say you think the president is a racist, there's only one step after that.
You can't go back.
Which is he has to be removed.
Well, again, and that points to what I said earlier. I think that then puts them in a defensive position. It's hard to defend the president elsewhere if they're defending a racist.
Yeah.
Chris Cuomo on CNN had Chris Kobach on, who's running for Senate.
I saw that.
Did you see that, where he asked him point blank, would you support, a president if he said I'm a racist? And he's, hemmed and hawed. And
how did you not know that question was coming?
Yeah, how do you not answer
know
it?
That question was coming?
Right, but I think there are base voters who look at that and would react like Chris Kobach does, because then they're like, well, that means I can't support my guy even if I like him on all these policy things, and so that's why they are reluctant, because they can't defend anymore, and they have to acknowledge they were wrong.
Okay, so I just thought of a great poll question, and you have to answer for all Republicans.
Oh, okay. People will be excited about this.
Oh, this is going to be a good one, because there's no positive way you could answer this. I love asking questions that there's no way you can get out of. Support a racist president who implements traditional conservative policy, or vote for Elizabeth Warren. what would you do? You are the totality of Republicans standing in front of me.
Oh my gosh. How am I supposed to represent Republicans on this?
I don't know, but we're almost getting to the point where,
I mean, I personally would not support a racist president. So but I don't think I represent the base of the party.
Absolutely.
So so again, I'm in conflict.
There'd be a struggle.
Right.
And I think the fact that and I mean an overtly racist president.
Oh, yeah.
And again, I don't know what more Trump has to do to prove he's got some racial issues.
And the problem is, I mean, if people really want to be true, they have to look beyond policy and say to themselves, if you support a president who's overtly racist, you're supporting inequity in the law and unfairness under the law and all the policies that emanate from him. And that's counter to what we believe in America.
But
I mean,
people,
nothing else matters.
They don't think that far.
Yeah.
And if I distrust the media or the culture's definition of racism, because I just don't. If I distrust that you're just looking for racism everywhere, and I don't agree with your definition, that gives me all this wiggle room I need to look past what Trump may do in that area and just focus on 2 or 3 policies that I like. But it really gives me an opportunity to express how much I don't like the person on the other side.
Yeah.
And I think you marry those 2 things together. I think racism is a charge levied way too much in the United States. I generally agree from a policy perspective with the current president. I feel like, to your point, Republicans and conservatives have been attacked over the last 20 years and put in this box. And I can't stand the person on the other side. Suddenly, I can get myself to pulling the lever for someone that I've got some real questions about.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. And I think that Republicans are demoralized and disenchanted because they believe that many of their representatives, when as soon as they've been attacked, even over something ridiculous or obscure, that person immediately apologizes and, and rather than defending themselves. And so there's a mindset among many Republicans that, when that charge has been levied unfairly, that their own side doesn't stand up and say, no, it wasn't racist. And so they see in Trump as somebody who fights all the time, even when it's wrong, and even when he refuses to acknowledge what he said. They just are at the standpoint where we just want someone who fights back all the time.
How do we get past, and there is some legitimacy to this, Ilhan Omar has said some horrible things about Israel, about Jewish folks, and the Democrats really haven't stood up to that. How do we get past this whataboutism of, wait a minute, you expect me to take the high ground and the moral ground if I'm a Republican when the president says something that, let's just give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was xenophobic, it brushed up against being racist, but you don't hold yourself to the same standard when Oman says things that are obviously anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. And I think that on one hand, the president is the president. He has a bully pulpit, so there should be more responsibility that comes with his rhetoric than with a member of Congress on one hand.
That's amazing that 4 freshman congressmen have been elevated to the same level as the president of the United States. And they're being treated equally. And that's I can never recall before when that's happened.
And those are different platforms. One has an outsized bullhorn
100%.
compared to the other 4. And so there's that aspect of it. But I think when it comes to Congresswoman Omar, I think that the Democrats, I can't remember, there was a censor motion. I don't know if it passed.
There was. They took her name out of it and made it
that's
just
right. They watered it down.
General.
Yeah.
Yes, they watered it down.
So again, I think that was problematic, and I think that not taking her off of the Foreign Affairs Committee was also a mistake, because someone who holds those views, who's on a committee of that importance that has to do with our relationship with Israel, that puts us in a bad position. So I think they could have made a statement by removing her from that committee and having a censor motion. And so, I do think that the Democratic side hasn't been as strong as they should be when, criticizing their own when these types of statements are made.
I'll give you another one. Who's the doofus in Iowa?
Steve King.
Yeah, who's just a straight up white nationalist.
Right.
He doesn't hide it.
Oh, not at all.
The Republicans are like, we led a censure against him. We followed the rules in the censure, not what allegedly maybe happened on the House floor midweek, which we can talk about that because that was there's a lot of goofiness there.
That was nuts, yeah.
And we removed
Insider
him
baseball
from all of his committeeships that he was on.
Right.
Once again, now you expect us to do what?
Yeah, and they did. Now they waited a long time. They did that very late because
but they did it. If I'm looking
King,
back at the Dems, it's like, and you're going to do,
and that's
what?
The way you send a statement about a member whose conduct is just completely out of bounds, and sends a strong message that we're not going to tolerate this.
And isn't that though what's killing us too? That because you did something that I hang on to,
this tit for tat,
this back and forth. I don't have to if you don't have to. My guy's gross, but you're gross too. Isn't that where
every single time it's the whataboutism? Well, they said this, and how come we're not talking about the fact that da 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 da, and she did this? It's like, well, we have talked about it. It's been in the news. It doesn't justify or normalize what the president does in response by any means. And I don't. Again, you're right. We need to get out of that mindset, and we're not. And it's constant.
I heard the phrase, when you fight fire with fire, you just burn everything down. And that's what
we're witnessing. Yeah.
So for the past 3 years, I have really tried to understand that Republican sense of grievance frames it wrong from the beginning. That feeling in the Republican Party by white working class people that the world is changing, people are talking down to them, they are being they're being attacked for their religious values. Obama and you're clinging to your guns and your religion. Mitt Romney is going to put black people back in shades from Joe Biden. That I've desperately tried to educate myself on. There's a narrative that has come from the Democrats that has helped spawn some of this reaction in rural, working class white America. And there's some logic to it, and there's reasons for it, and it can be kind of studied and understand. And at the end of the day, you can take an approach that allows you to see those folks' perspective. I am rapidly running out of runway to get to where I say, okay, I get it. I don't side with you, but at least I can understand your argument.
Right.
And you have some legitimate reasons. But if this is the end result of that, what? And because all of that happened, this is what we're going to do about it. We're going to elect this president who's going to speak this way. You're trying to turn the clock back 50 years. That's not going to happen. I guess what I'm trying to say as a liberal, I've been trying to get there. I've been trying to understand. I'm rapidly running out of give a shit and want to. If this is the result of whatever is leading to this, I don't care. It's just got to get flushed out because we just can't go on like this. And your side, I'm not pointing at you, Brandon, but that side is never going to win that argument. This was a blip one time. That will go away.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is pushing it the other way.
Demographic trends and societal trends.
If
you look at the breakdown of young people under the age of 30 and how they've just shifted completely. That's the incoming generation that's going to be forefront of voting. So you have all of that. I do think that both parties are to blame for this realignment and focusing on just these very small, narrow segments of voters. The Democrats did not do much to mitigate the concerns of middle America. And in some fact, you could say they abandoned middle America.
Absolutely. The party that was supposed to be there for us left us.
Right. They have not made it a point to, say why why they care and explain how they're going to make things better and how they're not, the people who live in, in rural areas and Rust Belt towns are not under attack. They have just basically kind of thrown up their hands and saying, well, they're not our target. We're just going to not go after them. And I think that's been a mistake. And, thankfully there are a couple of presidential candidates that are saying we can't forfeit those voters. We need to make our case. We need to do that in a very strong way. But again, and I hate going back again to the 2016 election because there were so many factors involved.
Yep.
But perfect scenario, the fact that Hillary did not have a field team in Wisconsin on the ground, in Michigan.
She went there like twice, I think, the entire election cycle.
And again, just took it for granted. And you had grassroots organizers in these areas and core constituencies like union guys who were calling the campaign saying, hey, we need people on the ground. We want to get the vote out. What are you going to give us? And they just nothing. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's an example of how that kind of effort falls apart, and somebody like Trump can come in and, under those unique circumstances win. But again, you have to be able to reach out and give them an alternative and show that you care. So I think that has to continue, and there has to be that outreach, because there are people that are malleable and I think there are some that are open. You're not going to get the vast majority of them, but you don't need the vast majority of them. All you need is a handful of voters on the margins to flip all of these states.
If this is what it takes to build a coalition out of that group, take it. I guess I'm ready to say, you know what, that game's not worth playing. If this is what you have to do to energize that group, and right now the Republicans want to do it, have at it. If that's,
it's not sustainable. You can't fight on that level. You can't stoop to that level. You can't.
And this is all happening under the Republican brand. Yeah. If you're comfortable with that, go ahead, have at it. We just need to completely ignore that, go somewhere else maybe, and stitch together a different way to get this done. And it's just because what's left? I mean, to your point, the only thing that we're missing and the only lower we could go is mass physical violence.
Yeah.
And it feels like at any point that could break out.
And I think Democrats would be smart to pitch themselves, though, again, as the governing party, the mainstream party, the party that represents the vast majority of, Americans that are pragmatic, and paint the Republican Party as out of touch, small party. And again, to do that, they need to not go off track into some of these ideological directions, purity test. They need to. The infighting needs to stop, because there is a large segment of Republicans who have already left the party, but have it completely signed on to voting for the Democratic nominee. Yeah. And so you need to have those voters in tow to be able to build that win.
And if I was the head of the DNC, I'd want to make a commercial. Hey, are you any shade of blue? There's light blue, there's deep blue. If you consider yourself a liberal, a leftist, a progressive, I don't care where you are on that spectrum. Let me tell you how important it's going to be to vote for the Democratic
no matter
nominee
what,
for president. I don't care if you don't like him. Hey, you folks in Michigan that voted for Jill Stein, you think you might want to take that back a little bit? I just don't get, and I went on a rant at a younger person at work who couldn't vote for Hillary last year, so I think they voted third party. I'm like, you are partially to blame for this.
Did you ask him, how's that working out for you?
Oh, yeah. He you're trying to badger him into admitting, you're right and stuff, but...
Just please tell me he's not going to make the same mistake again.
That was my point. Are we going to make the same mistake again? If you are anything to the left, if you're 1 degree left, you have to vote for the mainstream party candidate. There is no excuse. This is what you get. Do you want to risk this again? If I were the DNC, I'd shut down the nomination process right now. I would just tab Biden and we'd just start campaigning.
And get on with it.
We're not messing around. Right. This is at a point. I never like the hyperbole that our democracy is in jeopardy or our nation's at risk.
Or this is the most critical election of our lifetime.
Because any of that. We're strong enough to survive anything, and we'll survive whatever this is. It's just how big of a bill is this going to cost us?
That's true. And I saw a political cartoon that visualized this, represented it graphically very well, and it showed I forgot what the stand-in they had for America, but it showed basically our institutions being stretched to their limit.
Yeah.
So almost like rubber, they're being stretched, and they're really being tested. They're holding strong, but again, they're under threat like never before, and so this is really a moment where we have to ask ourselves, thankfully we have these institutions, because if we had institutions that were even just a little less robust, even compared to some of our allies in other parts of the world, we might be in a completely different place than we are today.
Well, and in the middle of all of this, the Cush comes out with his 600-page merit-based immigration plan. Well, that's totally a wasted exercise. Nobody is in the mood to pass anything right now. I doubt we're even naming post offices anymore. What is the point of trying to get a comprehensive immigration bill even looked at or debated in this environment?
Oh, yeah, there's no point. It's not going anywhere.
And plus with Trump, his last pass went through this when he basically torpedoed the Republican plan to the point even that McConnell stood up and said, I got no idea what we're doing. I don't know what will pass. I don't know what he wants. Nobody is going to do that now.
No.
This is one, we need the problem more than we need the solution. I don't think anybody has the stomach to solve this, because it's like abortion, gun control, immigration. These are the big three that provide more to campaign off of than they do. Solving the problem isn't as beneficial as having the problem at this point. But see,
that also perpetuates and in some cases fuels the cynicism that Americans have about our process.
Absolutely.
The politicians don't really want to solve any of this, because it keeps, as long as these issues are alive, the money comes in, they continue to be able to fundraise off of it, they continue to be able to win re-election, because, if these problems come close to being solved, then, what else is there to propel them? And so that's, I think, there's many Americans that feel that way. And it was interesting. That reminds me of something else that happened. Apparently, a story that's going around that's being shared. Rush Limbaugh came out and said that, that whole fiscal responsibility thing, that was all bogus anyway. Nobody really ever believed in that. That's not a big deal. Debts, deficit, that type of statement.
That toothpaste is not going back in that tube for Republicans.
No, but the fact that he would come out and say that was bogus to begin with, and Republicans never really believed in that, it was a talking point. That's everything that people don't like about politics.
Well, I told Mike this when he was running for the 3rd. You're trying to cast a message of moderation, consensus building, getting things done.
And a moment in time when people don't want to hear that.
Sharice Davis is running commercials of her in an MMA gear hitting something.
Fighting.
The imagery couldn't be more stark. Nobody wants to hear about anybody's plan to solve anything right now.
Right. The opposition to Trump calls themselves the resistance. So how are you going to, as a common sense, lawmaker, be able to appeal to a group that is about resisting? You're not. And both sides are entrenched, and they both want to fight. And that's where we are.
So Tuesday of this week, there was a motion to censure Trump's comments in the House.
Yes.
And this gets a little bit kind of in the weeds with House parliamentary procedure rules, but apparently it is actually written in a rule that you can't impugn somebody's intent.
Right, and this goes back to Jefferson's Book of Parliamentary Procedure, which even this specific item predates him and goes back to Parliament in the UK when it came to the king not being able to actually call the king an avowed, racist or impugn the character of the king. So this idea goes way back. It was about not damaging institutions and causing discord in the legislative body.
This idea is stupid because as soon as that's over, I can fire up my phone and tweet any nasty thing I want about you.
You just can't do it on the floor, but you can do it in any other medium or channel you want to.
So Pelosi did something where she said Trump is a racist. If you don't believe that, you're a bad person. The dude from Georgia gets up, and now we're off into hilarity from there.
Well, yeah, because he wants to have those comments stricken from the record.
Wasn't going to happen.
And then, oddly enough, so you had Congressman Cleaver from Missouri who was presiding at the time, and he was so frustrated by this because he would have been put in the position of basically striking it from the record and reprimanding the speaker,
which is never going to happen.
No, and so he's said, "I'm done." He walked away, and there was this moment where nobody was in,
which was a stage protest.
Chair. Yeah, and so. Yeah. So eventually what you had happen was that you had, there was a resolution to vote to include it that fell along party lines, so it actually didn't get stricken from the record. But you had this whole episode kind of back and forth, and what both sides have said, well, we've both violated this at times, and and so Democrats accuse Republicans, saying similar comments have been made about Obama when you were in power. So this is... But so, it was kind of much ado about nothing. And you saw, I think Americans saw this and said, oh, wow, we've spent how much time on a issue of parliamentary procedure? And again, we can't pass anything of substance, and here we are fighting about something that doesn't matter. Yeah.
And you're right, much to do about nothing. I do think it was appropriate that the House censured Trump's comments.
And say something,
I do think that is an appropriate response, minus whatever that drama was that went down, that really was just for show within the House floor itself. And that's an antiquated concept that nobody really adheres to.
Oh, agreed, yeah.
So then the impeachment thing, where the congressman from Texas, I can't think of his name, he's the blind guy who basically was talking about impeaching Trump this day he was elected. He's been this from day one. Al Green?
I think that's right, yeah.
That's either this guy or a 70s soul singer. I can't figure out which one. He brought forth a motion to impeach, which they managed to shoot down. Yeah. I think it lost like 380 to 95 or something like that. This is another one where not the time. You don't pivot from this to that. We've had impeachment on the table for months and months based on the Mueller investigation. This is not a time to try to opportunistically wedge something through that's just going to cause more fighting on the Democratic side.
Inflame passions, yeah.
Absolutely. It is not the time to try to roll that dice and see if everything else going on, maybe you can catch fire somehow and get what you need. So I thought that was a colossal waste of time. In some ways, too, you handed Trump a victory in the middle of this massive shitstorm that he started.
Yeah, he thanked the Democrats.
No.
So, but again, you would expect less from him. You did have something of consequence happen this week. You did have the House vote to hold Attorney General Bill Barr and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in contempt, criminal contempt.
How does Wilbur Ross still have a job? Out of everybody in that cabinet that's been fired, isn't he like 80-something as well?
Oh,
he's
yeah.
older
I mean, he looks like he's barely alive.
And he's a billionaire, too, isn't he? What? So this is the second attorney general that's been sanctioned. Obama's
Eric Holder.
Yeah. He was sanctioned too. So again, this isn't something that is completely unprecedented.
But it doesn't happen often.
It doesn't. And this is a move for something down the line.
Right.
When you want to investigate something, when you want to call somebody to the House floor to testify.
Right.
This is a move that strengthens your legal hand perhaps in some other legal initiative that you're going to take.
And it shows you, I mean, this is really, in many ways, become politicized, but it's remarkable to think back on during the Clinton era, Attorney General Janet Reno, who had a very controversial tenure on a number of issues.
Hated.
I mean, but she was never held in criminal contempt like this. So
and she was the Attorney General on Waco.
Yes. Waco happened, Ruby Ridge.
Yeah.
That's right. Elian Gonzalez. I mean, all of these big events that were
never even got
criticized. No.
So that leads us to last night. Stick the landing moment for Trump at this rally in North Carolina.
Yes.
We both have said long before we've ditched off watching those rallies.
Yeah.
It's 90 minutes of just
babble.
You can't. He plays his hits, he throws a few insults in and move on. The thing that happened last night is he's talking about Ilhan Omar, and he is going through, she hates America, she talks bad about America, she's un-American, and this chant, "Send her back," pops up.
Yeah.
And it sprung up organically. But again, that crowd, Trump is a stand-up comedian at that moment. He's feeding to the crowd. The crowd's feeding back to him. He's adjusting his shtick to the crowd. And this chant goes on. And it's just this mean-spirited moment when you're looking out at that crowd that's listening to the President of the United States, where they seem to have this open dialogue going on about who is an American and who is not. And that just seemed to be that struck a very kind of gross chord. When you thought it couldn't get any grosser this week, we find a way to add one more thing that says, wow, that really shouldn't be happening in the United States.
Yeah.
Did you believe Trump's thing where he was really offended by that?
Right. They're just parroting what he said. So how can he be offended? I mean, it's not. It's interesting that he felt some reason to distance himself from it, because usually he doesn't. I mean, I don't know why in this case. He's because I can't remember the last time. This is the first time his rally attendees have said something offensive. They've been shouting "lock her up" about Hillary for how long now?
And he threw somebody out. That's one of his standard things. He was yelling or something. It just, again, it fascinates me that I heard senators today. I heard congressmen today. I heard all kinds of people talking about what a threat to the American way of life this 30-some-year-old Somalian refugee who's a single congresswoman from Minnesota is.
Yeah,
and I can't believe that narrative has been allowed to take root. Don't get me wrong. I think Ilhan Omar is a garbage member of Congress. I think she has said some horrible stuff.
Yeah,
I think
agreed.
she has no policy chops. She doesn't even wade into that. She is mostly about sanctions on Israel. She's made any number of anti-Semitic marks. And this is the person. This is our new boogeyman. This is the person we're going to get riled up about. It just... I don't. Well,
yeah. I mean, the opposition is exaggerating her influence, her reach, her importance.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just, again, this is one person, a freshman who has no seniority, and to speak like she's like the threat to our entire way of life is just ridiculous.
And the fact that Lindsey Graham called them communist.
Yeah.
On
that's
Fox
right.
and
I forgot about that
one morning. Again, I don't know what happened to you, Lindsey, but wow, one day you're going to look back on this and say, boy, I hope whatever you get out of this was worth it.
Whatever he can to stay in Trump's good graces. That seems to be his MO.
So let's end with, mercifully, the rediscover of fiscal responsibility that the Republicans seemed to find when Rand Paul stood up and stopped the 9/11 responders bill moving forward in the Senate. You want to take this one? You want to try to explain what your party's going for here?
I can't explain it. I read that, and my immediate thought was like, oh, how convenient. Of all things, this is what you're going to plant your flag on and say, now we have to be fiscally responsible on an issue where there's, basically in complete 100% support for providing funding for the first responders. So, it speaks again to cynicism, and I don't know, because I haven't heard any elaboration on his comments as to why this and why now. There was another congressman who did something similar within the past year, Republican as well, who held up funding for hurricane victims as well. Yeah. So again, there's this tendency, this pattern of, claiming fiscal responsibility when it comes to aid for victims, whether it be victims of natural disasters, 9/11 first responders. Yeah. But I mean, talk about the optics. The optics of it are horrible. Yeah. Why would you?
Well, you just watched Jon Stewart eviscerate a congressional committee.
Right.
In a viral video that had America standing up and cheering.
Everybody was watching that. It resonated across
Jon Stewart,
party lines.
He's intelligent. He's a comedian. He is used to using his words and his voice to make a point. And after you saw that, now you want to step into the crosshairs on that. You want to be the next one. He was already on Fox News talking about what a joke and an abomination this was. So number one, again, let's take it from just the political calculation. Why am I stepping in front of an issue that 99% of all Americans want and putting myself in the crosshairs of somebody who the American people listen to on this issue?
And that's what I'm trying to figure out.
No clue.
And I don't even recall if Rand Paul is up. I don't think he is.
What's the point?
What does he gain from this? This isn't an issue where the president is down his back saying he needs to stop it. So I really am struggling to find out his motive.
And it's I took credit away from Elizabeth Warren just because how dumb she handled the rollout of her DNA test.
Yeah.
That was just dumb.
That was a
smart person
amateur
does
rookie
not
mistake. Yeah.
It's amateur. And we debated too. She didn't listen to anybody.
Right.
She got this idea. She just did it. I didn't like Rand Paul anyway, but I'm taking less points away from him because you're just dumb.
Yeah.
There's just no smart play to this. And have we gotten so far down this tribal rabbit hole? Wouldn't 20 years ago, we Republicans and Democrats would have had a joint presser praising each other and praising how generous. I mean,
right.
What? Who are you standing up for on this? And this is the fiscal hill you're going to die on?
Yeah, tell me what constituency is clamoring to have, funding halted for 9/11 first responders out of this sense of fiscal responsibility. Oh, and we need to cut down our deficit because this is going to make the difference. This, of all things, we're not going to tackle anything else, but this will be the one defining moment, and we're going to take a stand on this.
I'll vote for a tax cut that adds $1 trillion to the deficit, but I won't deficit spend $1 billion for 9/11 responders.
Right.
This is what drives me insane. I wish the Republicans would come out and say, this is what we feel strongly enough that we are willing to deficit spend on.
Yeah.
So help us understand defense, military, homeland security. Just make a little bullet point list, because it's not healthcare, it's not education, it's not taking care of the 9/11 responders. What is it that Republicans feel strongly enough?
Well, and there doesn't seem to be any consistency. So
there's not.
Well, but again, if they gave us a rubric, then they would be on the record and they'd have to abide by that. They're not going to do that.
Because I think this is where Bernie Sanders misses this massive opportunity and why he's being overtaken in the polls by Elizabeth Warren. Don't frame this as free stuff for everybody.
Yeah.
Frame this argument about we are going to deficit spend. I just want to spend it on stuff that's more important to everyday people.
Yeah, this is happening already. It's going to happen. So where should we focus our priorities?
Why are we deficit spending to build tanks that the Army says it doesn't want, and we park them in a field in Ohio? It's a jobs program. Let's just call it what it is, and deficit spend to educate people and for employment opportunities for the 21st century.
Yeah.
It just
that would be the way to handle that question. I don't know why he doesn't.
I am absolutely I'm disgusted with the Republicans. I'm disappointed/disgusted with my own team. If this is the way the game's played, screw it. I don't. This is a week where I don't care. I don't care. You know who deserves to win the presidency in 2020? Nobody.
Yeah.
Maybe we could just hold that office blank for 6 months and just try again.
There were bumper stickers to that fact in 2016, about, that, I should vote for no one for president or something along those lines.
Okay, I got one more required question where you're the entire Republican Party.
Oh, God, here we go.
I come to you in October of 2016, and I say, listen, I know you're not comfortable with what you got. I'm totally not comfortable with what I got. How about this? We let Obama have it for one more year, and we try again. Your guy's out. Hillary's out. We start the primary season over, and we see what we can do.
Well, setting aside the constitutionality of it.
Oh, yeah, the Constitution doesn't exist.
Spoiler alert, it's not constitutional. Yeah. So in that case, I think that would be the best outcome.
Every Republican would have said, I'll take that.
We could have, saved ourselves the past, 3 years of wackiness.
And if we would never have taken it because we were convinced we were going to win.
Right.
Should I even ask about Chernobyl this week?
No, ask me next week.
I'm not even gonna.
Just ask me next week.
You were gonna think of an excuse, but it's like I'm not even gonna try.
I'll do it. Yeah, I'll wait till next week.
I've been so disappointed in the Netflix emails I get. I get excited when something's new on Netflix, but everyone I've posted is gonna be like, I don't think that's what I'm gonna do. Do you watch old stuff on Netflix?
Yeah, from time to time.
Yeah.
I get into old sitcoms a lot of times. Yeah.
I'm going through and watching all of the Star Trek spinoffs.
Oh, okay.
The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. I think I can squeeze literally 3 months out of that in Netflix while I'm waiting for something.
Some of those are pretty bad, though, right?
Some of them are pretty bad. Some of them you could just hit the highlights of the season. You don't need to watch everything.
Gotcha.
And this is back when a season of shows was 26 episodes.
Yeah.
So if you got 8 seasons to watch, that's a pretty strong commitment at that point.
It is, yeah. So, that's what I'm finding going back. Long gone days.
Yeah. There was no 10-season episode season. You were in the long haul for that.
Yeah. No, agreed. I got through all of Stranger Things season 3.
That's pretty good.
So, yeah.
That's pretty good. But that's kind of like, it needs to pick it up in season 4. So
what I need to get because I don't have HBO Go and I don't have DirecTV. So I have a thing for a HBO trial period.
Yeah.
So sign up for that and then use that to watch Chernobyl and everything else. So
See,
because I'm in this area
you
where
just got to up your TV game.
I do, but because I pick and choose what I subscribe to right now, and I could have subscribed to another one, but then I'm always constantly thinking like, how many should I subscribe to?
I say this all the time. We are in a golden age of television.
We are.
If you are reading, you are wasting your time. TV is so much better.
There's so much good content out there.
You got to start consuming some content.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. People that say, I don't read, I just watch TV, you really should give TV a shot. It's really good right now.
I actually want to start watching the one on the Last Tsar, that new Netflix one on the Romanovs.
It's this weird combination between a documentary where like Dr. So-and-so narrates and then they switch over to
they switch over? Really? Is that what happened? Okay.
It's okay, but it takes a little bit to get used to it.
Because that's a fascinating period in history too, when everything that went down. So I'd be curious to check that out.
Yeah. You have to watch Chernobyl first.
I know. I'll do. Yeah. Chernobyl's next.
All right. That's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.